Hey there, guys, gals, and those in between. We're back, and after a trip to those distant galaxies, I wanted to talk about a game I think deserves more love and is misunderstood by most. I wanted to do this before I turn to something more modern. That, and apparently, I just hate of being any use to the algorithm. So sit back, relax, grab a frosty beverage, and let's talk about Final Fantasy II. A game, in my opinion, is the most important of the classic Final Fantasy series. Now, when I say classic, by that I mean the first three Final Fantasy games released on various Japanese home computers in the Famicom system. If you're watching this, I don't think you really need much of an introduction to the Final Fantasy series or Part 1, especially since I did a massive video on Stranger of Paradise. But to keep it brief, Final Fantasy is one of Square's flagship RPGs, releasing over 30 years ago. The idea was, according to Akitoshi Kawazu, whose name will pop up a lot because he's someone who worked on the original and the sequel, the first Final Fantasy was Square's attempt at making a cool RPG. And it worked. It helped make Square a powerhouse, and also helped make the form that JRPGs would take in the coming decades. But they couldn't just rest on their laurels. There were some internal issues as to whether they should do a sequel or not. Square's head honchos at the time felt that since this would be a sequel in name only and have no connection to the first, why call it Final Fantasy at all? I think anyone who's been a fan of this series long enough has had a curious friend or loved one ask, hey, how long is this game if there's 10? Well, now 16. The team though insisted this was a better move as they would want people who played the first to buy the sequel, while implementing things from the original that players enjoyed, while also innovating. Ironically, this is what mainline Final Fantasy would become. Games that have no connection to one another besides Easter eggs, with gameplay being changed sometimes radically, while coincidentally having thematic similarities between titles. This was intentional by the team as once more they saw the sequel as an opportunity to do things they couldn't in the original and go all out. It's a mindset I can get behind, as opposed to now when sometimes sequels are made, it's just a new coat of paint and little more. But that thematic connection would start here. Once more, Kawazu, who worked in the first and second games in developing the battle system, he stated how, besides this game being a total 180 from the first, a big focus from the start was to hone in on the narrative and the storyline. Because if you've never played Final Fantasy, it is a bit sparse on the story, which isn't a knock against it. It's very clearly inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, so it feels like someone's session. The story is really just a framework for the adventure, and it's more about the journey itself than the overall narrative. Final Fantasy II would be just the opposite, with its story taking center stage, hence the use of actual named characters and a story that ties into the game rather than you are simply the chosen ones. And that's because, according to Kawazu, even at that point in 1988, he was getting a bit tired of video game stories being little more than defeat evil and save the princess. He wanted a game that could do more, and he saw RPGs at the time were pushing themselves to fully show what the genre is capable of. He cites two examples as games doing just that. The Megami Tensei series, which if you've never played anything besides Persona, are dark JRPGs that have themes regarding philosophy, religion, what is law, what is evil, and the nature of God. He also took inspiration from Last Armageddon, which, similar to Dr. Hauser, not only sounds badass, I mean, it's called Last Armageddon. I just found out it exists, and it's something I need to put more time into. From the brief look, it's about Earth after mankind has ended, and who knows how they ended. The barren planet now belongs to the demons. That is until my man Bones here gets 360 no-scope by some aliens. The aliens say this is our planet now, we're gonna colonize it, obey or die. So now you play as 3 different group of demons and have to fight aliens in order to claim Earth as your own. Also, apparently Hitler, of all people, makes an appearance. Well, I mean, if there's someone I expect to be in hell, it would be him, so they got me there. And once more, like Dr. Hauser, I desperately need to spend more time with this. Being inspired by such games, it's no wonder that the second game is such a massive leap. And this isn't just surface level. One of the big things during development was the usage of the word memory system, a mechanic still unique to this game, in which certain keywords glow, thus you learn them and use them during conversation. During an interview with Famitsu in 1988, Kenji Terada, who was the scenario writer for the first 3 Final Fantasy games, stated that the team wanted the word memory system to more imitate the flow of conversations. That in RPGs, how information is gathered is rather one-sided. You meet the king, he tells you what to do, you do it, he tells you what else to do, you leave to go do that, someone tells you what to do, you rinse, wash, and repeat. This isn't a complaint on the genre as a whole. After all, there are hardware limitations to take into account, and it's commendable that 30 years ago the team at Square decided to try something that even today modern games still grapple with. Immersing yourself in the world and making it seem like you're an integral part of what is happening, as opposed to a set of conditions you have to fulfill to continue. I've said before how some games give you the illusion of choice, multiple paths, when in reality sometimes one choice seals the deal. So throughout the game you have to contend with save the orphans or fuck them kids. Which, always, fuck them kids. And while the word memory system is archaic, it was a commendable attempt, one that Terada hoped would lay the groundwork for upcoming games, stating that maybe one game could take that theme and subvert players' expectations, and then a later game could return to a more orthodox path. And while the word memory system was never used again, he was rather prescient, not only in regards to Final Fantasy III, which was more a return to form, but also decades later with Final Fantasy VIII, which would subvert fans' expectations with its story and battle system, only for Final Fantasy IX to be a very traditional Final Fantasy. That's not the only thing that the Oracle known as Terada mentioned. Back in 1988, while working for the script for Part 2, he talked how an employee stated they wanted the game to make them cry, be a real tearjerker. And while that wasn't the intention for Part 2, instead it was to make players feel a variety of emotions, this jerking of tears would come to fruition years later, as many people cite moments in Part 6 and especially Part 7 with the death of Aerith as moments that made them cry. And for many, that would be the first time a video game would make them cry. Lastly, he talked about villains, how he wants a game that shows the villain side and why they are the way they are, something that would become more common in later years, all owing thanks to the Emperor, or the main baddie of the sequel, who plays an overreaching role. We've seen this focus on villains throughout not only Final Fantasy, but even Square itself, with many of their games having compelling antagonists, a la Eve in Parasite Eve, the Organization in Kingdom Hearts, and multiple antagonists in Final Fantasy. There are too many to count. And speaking of villains, that leads to one of the biggest things this game did, normalizing musical motifs in regards to characters. While things like bosses having unique music for encounters and battles were a thing, this really nailed the idea of having musical backdrops for both protagonists and antagonists. It's really hard to imagine those scenes in Kingdom Hearts with the Organization without the audio that accompanies it. And we see that with the Emperor's theme when he's around, and of course the Rebel Army theme for your ragtag group whenever you're at your home base. Now, with all this innovation and groundwork framing, why is it that Final Fantasy II has such a negative reputation? Well, I can think of a few reasons besides the gameplay. Final Fantasy II's reputation comes from a variety of factors. And let's be clear, it only has a bad rep outside of Japan, which we will get to. But I think one of the main things is that Part 2 is unique in that it suffers from both first game and second game syndrome. Now, first game is just that. The first game in a series that, while being good, after a few sequels and improvements, it's hard to actually go back to that first iteration. The best example being the first Final Fantasy on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It being a broken, buggy mess, or my go-to is the original Fire Emblem. If you've only played the later entries, well, when you play this one, your thought process will be, wow, this kind of plays like ass. Now, second game syndrome is where the sequel does a complete 180, and it can drive some people away. The best example would be Zelda 2. While many people enjoy the game now, I recall a time when the internet just decided the game sucked. Same with Wind Waker. Final Fantasy II suffers from both because it's a second game, but since many see it as the first in the Saga series of games, which would later refine many of the systems the game introduced, it also has some of that first game jank, which isn't too bad. When the game was first released close to 30 years ago, Famitsu gave it rave reviews, 35 out of 40, being one of the top scored games of the year, only being surpassed by Dragon Quest III and actually tying with Super Mario Bros. 3. Yes, what is considered by many as one of the greatest games of all time, tied with some Mario game. Okay, I'm joking, you can put the pitchforks down. But it's crazy that in the East it's beloved and not so much here. And it's not the only game that has this. What if I told you there's a video game beloved by Hideo Kojima, along with Kamiya, and a few others that people here in America hate? It's true. The video game highlight is that game. And similar to Final Fantasy II, I believe the frosty reception here was simply because of a thing called time. Final Fantasy II was never released here stateside. Most people know Square skipped Part 2 and 3 in favor of 4, and this had led some to believe Square thought the game was bad or Western gamers wouldn't get it. But you hear this a lot when games don't get ported, people making assumptions over the quality of said game, which is silly. Because it's like saying, guys, obviously Mother 3 sucks, that's why it's never been ported. Also, Mother 3 is never getting ported, we need to just drop that. So the idea of Part 2 never sent stateside because of quality is farcical. Especially because there exists some promotional material that shows Square was toying with the idea of bringing both Part 2 and 3 over to the States. And there was some work done. Hiromichi Tanaka, who worked on the game, said that it was actually almost released in the States, but because of unseen difficulties, which he didn't specify, one could assume maybe Nintendo of America, the idea was scrapped. The translator for the series, Kaoru Murayama, has stated that there was some initial and very rudimentary English translations for the game that is playable from start to finish. They stressed this was a very early draft and that it was clunky due to the difficulty of translating from Japanese to English with the NES limited hardware, and it was cancelled before a full translation can be done. You can actually still play that ROM today in all of its broken English glory. End of the day, from all my research, it seems the main cause of it not happening? The Super Nintendo. The original Final Fantasy released in the US 4 months before the Super Nintendo came out in Japan. And at that time, Square was already making Final Fantasy IV, so it was a business decision. Instead of porting a game for aging hardware, instead use those resources to port the newest version for the newest system, and instead of 4, they just named it 2 instead. And this is partially why Final Fantasy II has such a negative reputation, because it wasn't released here stateside until 2003, so there was no nostalgia for it. And by the time we got it, gamers were used to the refinements that came after. To put it into perspective, we got Final Fantasy X before we got Final Fantasy II. So it was judged harshly and retrospectively, since an experimental game from 15 years ago doesn't feel the same way 15 years later. It was now being judged based on the criteria of other games that it ironically set the standard for, being outshined by the sequels it inspired. That isn't to say that the game doesn't have some issues. No experiment is a 100% success, but I feel like the issues I have of the game are real and not made up like many other people have. So what do I mean by made up? Before I get into that, let's talk about the biggest thing that sets this game apart. It's that Square abandoned a traditional leveling system for instead a stat-based system and a skill-based system. Want to level up a specific spell like fire? Do that and you gain more devastating fire spells while also increasing the stats associated with it, like magic power to cast more spells, and intellect to make the spells more destructive. Do you want the bowman Maria to instead focus on axes? Not only will axes go up, but your strength with them will also increase. This is where the game gets the most criticism from people that never played the game. The inspiration, according to Kawazu, was a nature versus nurture kind of thing, that the character building process will last throughout the entirety of the game. So someone isn't born a mage, but rather by using a lot of magic, they will become one. He states he did not expect people to find exploits in the game, the most famous for hitting your teammates to gain HP and endurance. People abused that to max out their endurance and HP. The only reason you were allowed to do this was as a way to wake up characters afflicted with sleep. This was not an intentional thing, but rather an oversight that got exploited and abused. Kawazu had some rather interesting thoughts regarding the stat building system, stating, "The concept of experience points that appears in RPGs is rather abstract and sloppy if you think about it. If you think about growing by training your body and mind realistically, experience points are too predictable and gradual. They are predetermined stages, like when you reach a certain level, you learn this magic. It's just like reliving something that someone else created. I wanted to incorporate more enjoyment into the game than just reliving that experience." I can somewhat understand what he was going for. Anyone that's attempted to learn a new skill realizes that people grow at different rates. Now, back to my original point about making things up. You know how I said most people never really played this game? It's clear because I could understand their complaints if they played the original version that was never released here, or Origins, which was just the WonderSwan version and had little changes to the overall gameplay. If that was your first experience, I get it, because good lord, is it grindy, stats and skills take forever to level up, everything's too damn expensive, and if you raise some stats, it can lower others. So focus on magic, your strength goes down. Focus on weapons, your magic goes down. Do healing spells, your endurance might take a hit. Nothing is worse than a stat down, but that's only for that version. Going back to the HP thing, I've seen many reviewers state that yes, you can hit your party members as a way to gain more HP and endurance, but here's the thing, it's not really needed outside of Origins. In my playthrough of the PSP version, I never had to do that. Yes, my HP was busted, but that was from fighting harder enemies and preparations for the Arcane Labyrinth and optional dungeons with the super boss. But nothing in the base game requires you to start cheating out stats. Except again, if you're playing Origins. But see, that's the thing. Not only did Origins come out super late, but 7 months later Square released Dawn of Souls. And unlike Origins, which was literally just a shovelware of the Japan-only WonderSwan versions, Final Fantasy Advance was a new game that took advantage of the Game Boy Advance. It was a cartridge that had the first two games with updated sprites, and for many was the first introduction to Final Fantasy II. It had a plethora of quality of life improvements, including the removal of stat downs, reduced item costs, and it decreased the amount of time in order to gain levels for skills like magic and weapons. This works so well because in lieu of enemies having levels, they have ranks, which are limits on your growth. Are the enemies in the first part of the game no longer letting you level up weapons or magic? Well, you've outgrown them. Move on until you find tougher enemies. This is a great way of letting the player level up without holding their hand. And honestly, there's nothing in this game post GBA that requires extensive stays at areas to level up. And the best change? Automatic HP level ups. One of the many improvements that Square made to the game was that every so often you would just automatically gain more HP, typically anywhere from every 7 to 10 battles. So there was no need to abuse party members like they owed you money and you know damn well their income tax just came in. Reviewers at the time took note of this, with many stating that Advance completely fixed Final Fantasy II and streamlines the mechanics of the game, making it friendly to newer players. Which makes it rather frustrating that I read a review of the PSP version that came out 3 years later from the same source and the same reviewer who was now stating that you have wacky systems you have to abuse. Like, my guy, did you forget your own words? Basically, the internet has lied to you, as it typically always does, which is aggravating because you can make some actual criticisms of this battle system, but the ones that people mentioned are ones that Square are keenly aware of and have improved upon newer releases, so much so that they're non-existent now. And just to show I'm not a hack, I do have complaints regarding some components of the mechanics of Final Fantasy II that I feel other games would improve upon. Firstly, many games like say Elder Scrolls or the Saga series would group all magic into one school. So instead of saying, hey, you have to level up fire, thunder, ice individually, It would just be black magic, and using black magic will level it up as a whole, which is a much better system. This is a much bigger complaint for your white magic or healing spells as it's known as. Firstly, you have to use it during battle. So if you heal outside of battle, the spell will grow, but you won't get any MP or spirit growth outside of battle. So you lost the main benefits of casting white magic in the first place. But also, you really only cast white magic if you need to heal. But if you want to grow a specific spell, like Cure, you're going to have to waste a turn casting the spell so you can fully get the benefits of said white magic. This is double for any spells that heal status effects. If the spell level is too low, it can actually fail. So again, depending on the enemy level, you're going to be wasting a turn in order to make sure your status healing spell grows stronger throughout the game. And it's never a great thing when a game makes you break the flow of combat or makes you play a certain way. Lastly, while you don't need to hit your teammates like you got a D on your test and your mother just found out about it, endurance determines how much MP you gain from said health ups. And you only gain endurance if you end the battle with less HP than you started. So if you heal, you don't get that endurance bump. This was only actually fixed in the Pixel remaster, where instead the formula determines how much HP you lost overall during the course of the encounter itself. So if you lost half your health but healed, you would still gain endurance because you took damage. But in other versions, it's kind of paradoxical, because they want you to use healing magic, but if you do that, you don't gain endurance. So it encourages you to essentially not heal when you're at a critical condition, but to use healing spells when you're almost essentially at full health and you won't really need it. It's not excessive, and I didn't have to spend a lot of time doing it, but this is an issue if you're playing anything other than the Pixel remaster. Kawazu himself stated he didn't think the team really understood what he was going for with this. Which, again, so long as you're not playing Origins, you really only have to be mindful of white magic and endurance. So with that said, it's time for us to now dive into the story of Final Fantasy II. The start of Final Fantasy II sees our main characters get their asses blown out. No, literally, they're just there having their time of their lives when the Emperor and his forces invade and kill everyone there. Our ragtag team try to flee but are caught by 4 knights. This is an unwinnable battle and the first one that would become commonplace in the series. Fights you cannot win, and I think it's a great way to show character progression. You can't fight these soldiers yet, and the Empire has hundreds of them, but in time you'll be able to vanquish them with ease. I enjoy it as much as when bosses become normal encounters. There are good ways to show growth. The party loses and Firion wakes up and learns everyone made it but Maria's brother Leon. Meeting the leader of the rebels, Hilda, the Princess of Finn and now commander of the Wild Rose, you are informed that they will not let you join. You barely survived and Hilda would not feel right sending you potentially to your deaths. Also, if it wasn't obvious, a rebel group attacking a far-reaching empire? Yeah, they were inspired by Star Wars. Leaving the base, they also meet Scott, the Prince of Kashuan, who's a total coward. The group then makes their way to Finn. Here, if you try to fight any of the on-screen enemies, they will kill you. So, don't do that. Inside, you find Gordon, the first Prince of Kashuan, and Hilda's fiancé. He offers them his ring as proof along with the truth. Finn fell due to Count Borgin, who turned traitor and aligned with the Empire. He then relays some parting words for Hilda, first considering his feelings that he does indeed love her, implying that like many royals, this was a political marriage, but he had truly fallen in love with her. He beseeches the party to not reveal how deeply he loves Hilda, because he's keenly aware that he is not long for this world, and he doesn't want to saddle her with the grief of the life they could have had if just things had been more peaceful. He then tells his party to tell his brother, and I quote, "Stop being a little bitch." Kidding, he tells him that he has courage and he needs to find him before he passes along. This is also a thing introduced in this game, characters dying. Not only do characters die, but ones that work independent of you. This scene does a great job of making this a more human story, or as human as a NES-era RPG can get. Going back to Altair, you provide the ring, and Minwu implores Hilda that the party have shown they are ready for what life may toss at them. Hilda says to go to Salaman and find Mithril from a man named Joseph for the rebellion, and Minwu joins you with a canoe. In lieu of a fourth party member, that slot is taken up by a rotating cast. Off to Salaman, you learn that no one can help because Borgin is holding their loved ones hostage in a cave. Here we do see a valid complaint of the game. The dungeons kind of all suck. Remember how I said Final Fantasy 1 was more of a D&D game? Well, the dungeons were like that. It was all about preparation to tackle the dungeon. Make sure you have enough items, false rooms, and places that damage you. The point was the journey itself, and attrition was part of that journey. We still see flavors of that here, where the point is to reach the end. And I know you're gonna say, but every dungeon the point is to reach the end. Well, yeah, but later games would have an emphasis on exploration. Sure, searching routes that don't lead to the end could potentially reach nowhere, but you could also find better items and equipment that were not available in shops. Later games rewarded curiosity, and while you do get items and chests here, not finding the right route just typically leads to an empty room with a high encounter rate. Expect to run into plenty of just barren empty rooms. As much as I prefer Final Fantasy 2 over 3, I will give 3 credit. The dungeons are overall better, and we start to see more of that design that encourage players to take their time in finding every nook and cranny, as opposed to just rushing to the end. Here, they were still figuring things out. Also, the encounter rate can be considered simply atrocious. In some areas, you can't go a few steps without running into enemies. It's the equivalent of walking into an opposing political web space and declaring, "I advocate for literally the exact opposite of everything you do." And yeah, that's more of a flaw of the time that it was made in. Some RPGs were just enemies every few seconds and grinding. Finding a sergeant, you defeat him, free the citizens including Joseph's daughter, and you're able to get mithril equipment for you and your crew. Your next mission's to head to Basque, where the Empire is constructing the Dreadnought, a flying battleship. Right now, only one airship exists, and that's being used by Cid. First Cid in a Final Fantasy game. But unlike his airship, which is more for travel, the Dreadnought is a moving fortress. Heading there, it's too late to stop. It takes off with the mysterious Dark Knight in tow and begins attacking various cities throughout the world. The ailing King of Finn tells the party that if they toss Sunfire into the engine, it will overheat and destroy the Dreadnought. But you need the Goddess Bell to get Eagle's Torch to get the Sunfire. Yeah, I know this all seems silly, get this to that for that, but it does lead somewhere good. The Goddess Bell is near Salaman, so Joseph joins your party, and while trying to look for it, you learn that the animals know where it is. But you're okay because Guy speaks Beaver. Yeah, in official materials, it's stated that Guy was raised by animals. This explains his ability to understand them and also his tenuous grasp on the English language. Even knowing that, it's still funny that Guy speak Beaver. You run into Borgin, and after beating him rather easily, and then the boss, Borgin tosses a boulder to kill the party and Joseph holds it back at the cost of his own life. This is no fake out. Joseph, a party member that assisted you, has now died. Another life lost to the Empire. With the bell, you head to Kashuin Keep to find Gordon finally grew a sack and wants to help. Joining, you find the torch and the ever-burning flame, the Sunfire. As you leave, you see Cid's ship being taken by the Dreadnought and learn that it has to refuel, so now's the perfect time to strike. This can be a negative, but sometimes the game doesn't really tell you how to get to places, but rather gives you vague descriptors. I say can be because this is just the way games were designed at the time. They implored you to explore the overworld and well save because there's a chance you can go to the wrong area and get destroyed. So if you're going to play today, don't expect the game to always hold your hand. You then find the Dreadnought, and even though I said the dungeons are not so great, I will say that Final Fantasy was making that first step towards mesmerizing and varied locations to challenge the player. Right now you're on a giant battleship, you're then in the guts of a beast, you fight in a castle that dwells in a cyclone, you also go to heaven and hell. Again, the actual layout of these dungeons leave a lot to be desired, but it's nice to see Square was already finding that unique Final Fantasy flair with their settings that later games would expand upon. Running to the ship, you make your way to the engine, overload it, and destroy it while the Black Knight curses your name. Maria, though, feels like she knows that Dark Knight. Who is this mysterious stranger? So you rescue Cid and Hilda, Hilda is acting a bit tired and retires to her room. The king dies, but he does relay 3 orders. Minwoo is going to find the Ultima magic. Now that Gordon stopped being coward, he's in charge of the rebel army. And lastly, Firion and the party must travel to Deist to find if Dragoon still exists. Boarding the ship of Captain Layla, she decides to mug you. You beat her and she's like, well, I'll join your party now. Onward to Deist, it's been devastated, with only 2 survivors left. You learn that the Empire decided the best way to stop them was to poison the water supply and kill the wyverns that the Dragoons ride on. The last wyvern gives you its last egg and begs the party to save it even though you can't use it for your battle efforts. The party travels to the springs to bathe the wyvern egg and ensure its birth. Back at Altair, you discover the Hilda you rescued was a Lamia and that the real Hilda was taken by the Emperor and is instead being offered as the grand prize in the tournament. Rescuing her, you see the Emperor, the cause of all this, for the first time. Once the rescue is done, it's decided to take back Finn. The party is now more than strong enough as the rebel army finally reclaims their home. But not everything is as it seems. Minwoo is still gone, so you have to find Ultima, and Layla leaves the party. This part isn't fun. You need 1 item to get another item to actually open the tower for Ultima. Before you actually get into the tower, you're swallowed by Leviathan and meet Rickard Highwind, the last Dragoon, who joins the party as you escape the beast to enter the Mysidia Tower. Up at the top, you meet Minwoo, who uses his life force to go and release the seal of Ultima. Even though Finn was taken back, the Emperor is still around, and Minwoo knows that his threat is still looming, so he gives his life so that the party can obtain Ultima, the ultimate magic, which the way it works in this game is that it's more powerful depending on the level of all the magics you have. So if you have a powerful spellcaster, Ultima will make quick work of anything. Except in the original game. Yeah, in the original the spell kinda did nothing and never got stronger. Minwoo was right in his decision because the Emperor has now summoned the Cyclone, which, well yeah, it's a cyclone that's going around and destroying everything. Towns you visited are now ruins and NPCs you interacted with before are also dead. The Emperor will not stop until all submit to him or perish. With the last wyvern now grown, our team reached the castle in the sky, the non-Miyazaki version. Trekking your way up to what is again a castle that is in a cyclone that's destroying the world, you find the Emperor, you fight him, and you just kind of defeat him. Oh, okay. I guess we're all good. The bad guy is dead and dusted, and honestly, this would be a good endpoint. But this is where we see Final Fantasy really become Final Fantasy. The Dark Knight takes over the remnants of the Emperor's forces. Sid dies but gifts the party his airship, and we discover the Dark Knight is actually Leon, which might be a good twist. Mostly because we only see the Dark Knight twice for a few minutes, and at this point with so many characters, many of whom died, I think it's rather easy to forget about someone you knew at the start for 2 minutes tops. The issue with games this old is that it's hard to sometimes properly judge after it's been copied a million times. A good example was I recently went through Brian De Palma's filmography, and he had a movie called Sisters, a murder mystery involving 2 Siamese twins who had been separated. And yeah, spoilers for a 50-year-old movie, but if anyone has seen any police procedural, halfway through you're like, oh, the sister is just a split personality. It's still a good movie, like really good, and it has more in it, but I bet that reveal hit much harder 50 years ago. I bet in a pre-social media era, people walked out of that theater minds blown. So I'm not gonna mock the whole Dark Knight is Leon, because again, it was probably shocking 30 years ago. Now, we really don't get much reason why Leon's doing this. Was he mind controlled? Did the Empire's forces see his worth? War plays a huge theme of this game. Did Leon feel that while the Emperor was evil, overall him trying to control the world would actually be good in the long run? We never get answers. Again, other games would take this ball and expand on different philosophies regarding power and peace, but here we get the Super Devil. Not really kidding, in the middle of his spiel, the Emperor returns saying, yeah, I died, I went to hell, I kicked the shit out of the devil, and now I am the Emperor of Hell. I'm going to rule everything and destroy whatever I want. And the novelization seems to imply that because the Emperor always had dominion over Hellspawn, it was always his plans to go to hell, or at the very least, he had it as a backup plan. This is what I meant by it being the first Final Fantasy, because it starts with a story about war and its effects on those around them, the lust for power, and ends with the Super Devil. I'm not complaining. Lord knows I still love Part 4, with it saying, we got next level racists. We got racists on the moon. Moon supremacists. Rickard sacrifices himself in order to help the party escape, and Leon now joins the party. And you journey into hell to confront the Emperor once again. After you defeat him, even in death twice, he thinks so little of the party, aghast he was defeated by, in his words, insects. I don't think he ever bothered to learn the names of the people that killed him twice. And I really think that's the beauty of Final Fantasy II, is that there's nothing special about the party. They level up the same way as everyone else. They're not warriors of some prophecy destined to defeat evil. They were just a bunch of villagers living their life. In another world, they would have lived their life in peace in that village. They only gained this power because of the Emperor, because of his actions. He, in a sense, caused his own downfall by, according to him, mere insects. The party goes back to Fynn to celebrate. Leon says things have changed and he has to leave the party. They say that they'll be there to welcome him back. Also, Layla says she wants to peg Firion or something? And Maria is like, hell no! As peace is finally achieved, and the game ends. Or does it? Cause we have supplemental material. You see, my younger viewers, back when publishers would re-release a game, they would actually add in new content. For the Game Boy Advance Final Fantasy games, this usually meant new dungeons with more challenging bosses. But for Part 2, they did something different. They added the Soul of Rebirth, a add-on for Part 2, and in this you play as the departed party members Minwu, Scott, Joseph, and Rickard, whose equipment is what they had upon death. Now in the base game, when you get a new party member, they can be weaker than you, but they are tuned towards the upcoming challenges. Here, because characters are from the start, middle, and end, their stats are all over the place. So for Soul of Rebirth, you are going to have to spend some time grinding for those endgame enemies. The story here is, well, you're in the afterlife. Minwu thinks they're in the Jade Passage that leads to Hell, and the party realizes they're all connected to Firion in their quest to stop the Emperor. They seem rather content that they might be in Hell. After all, they did take part in war and end some lives, but they discover that in actuality they're in heaven and meet the souls of those lost in the conflict. Deciding to find out the reason for coming together, they gain a new Ultima spell from Minwu. At the end, they meet the Light Emperor, who informs them that when he died, his soul was split into two, with his light half going to heaven and his dark half going to hell. He asks the party to please forgive him, and they almost do before they see visions of their loved ones, telling them that the Emperor is still evil. And yeah, the Emperor is basically that one scene in The Simpsons where Lisa is astounded how evil Mr. Burns is, that even when he's trying to do good, he's still evil. Their loved ones show that Firion and his crew at this moment are fighting the Dark Emperor, and their warnings of the Light Emperor also being evil are quickly made true, because as soon as the party decides not to forgive him, the Light Emperor attacks, deciding if they cannot forgive him, then they have no purpose existing, so they must be destroyed. He was not asking for forgiveness because he feels remorse. He asks forgiveness to satisfy his ego. His plan is to rule everything: heaven, hell, earth, anything in between. And honestly, this is great. It really shows the characterization of the Emperor, that he seeks to conquer because he feels that this is his right, whether as a human, a devil which seeks to destroy what he feels like is his, or as an angel, his light side. He doesn't see it as evil, merely something that should happen because it is nature to him. So the party defeats the Light Emperor, we see their spirits watch over Firion, and Minwu declares they will end mankind's legacy of war as the game ends. Or does it? Again, we have a few more things to get into. Firstly, that the Emperor actually appears in Stranger of Paradise, the Final Fantasy I prequel, where he is elated that there are other worlds. After all, there means there are other places for him to place under his rule. And if you saw my Stranger of Paradise video, you are aware that Different Future, the final DLC with the Emperor, is in my opinion the best in Stranger of Paradise, or SOP as the cool kids call it. Lastly, for the PSP, they added some new areas, the Arcane Labyrinth and Arcane Dungeons. They used the word memory system to make areas to explore, and after going through 3 of the labyrinths, you can head to the dungeon in order to fight the new boss, Phykos, to get a character's ultimate weapon. The issue is that if you're going to do this for every character, that means 9 different times. That means heading down into 27 deaths in order to challenge Phykos, or 30 if you're going for the final rewards. And again, exploring dungeons was never this game's strong suit, and this doesn't change. Now, the final reward is actually story-based. You learn that the Guardian of the Depths, Demion, was once a child, obviously, who lived in a world of war. Eventually, his kingdom created the ultimate destructive magic known as Destroy, but they had just reached a peace deal, and they couldn't let anyone have it. So, Demion was chosen to guard this place forever, and the magic inside for all time. If you tell him destroy, he will fight you, and it's kinda sad. You see him crawling, dragging his body to protect the seal. It's pretty clear in this situation the party are the bad guys, and in a Kojima level twist showing war is pointless, destroy is pointless because it casts 10,000 damage, kills the party minus the caster, and leaves them with 1 HP and 0 MP. And well, that is once more not needed because Demion was the strongest enemy in the game. So if you beat him, there's nothing really stronger that you would need Destroy to use it on. He doesn't even get an enemy bestiary, again showing you're being the bad guys. If you decide not to be the bad guy, you can give him hope, and you are gifted the revive magic, which heals everyone, enemies and allies. So it can be good for taking things back to 0, and you don't need to fight him for that. And while I enjoyed the story, dear lord, I never want anything to do with Arcane again. It joins the Chrysler building in areas I never want to see in this lifetime. So that just leaves what happened after the game was released. Well, I already said what happened post-release, but let's talk about what Kawazu did after. He went and released, well, the Saga series, which would refine many of the more unique elements found in Final Fantasy to an extent. Kawazu has even stated that Saga allows him to experiment more than if he continued on with Final Fantasy, and has jokingly stated that if he continued with Final Fantasy, it wouldn't be as popular as it is today. The Saga series are a beloved series of games. I did 2 videos on them that combine a little bit of everything. Sci-fi, horror, you name it. The games also don't tell you a lot and can be kinda difficult, which is the intended purpose. Seriously, if you think Final Fantasy 2 is hard, please pick up a Saga game and get back to me. The reason for this, Kawazu stated, is that he likes hard games because it presents a challenge to overcome. And when people say Saga is too hard, a part of him wants to make it even harder. What an absolute legend. The Saga series went on to success, while meanwhile Final Fantasy went on to become Final Fantasy, and took elements from Part 2 such as an encompassing narrative, massive worlds designed with their own lore, compelling antagonists, and never being afraid to experiment now and again. Final Fantasy 2 is still considered a black sheep here in the West, but unlike many of the games I played before, where I've said there are no legitimate ways to play this one, the original Silent Hill 2 is still for some reason locked behind the PS2 and Xbox for some reason. Final Fantasy has been ported many times over the years. So the question comes, which version should you play? For me, that's easy. The PSP has Solar Rebirth storyline, you can skip all the arcane stuff, and also the sprite work in this version is amazing. I know the iOS versions had issues, but you can't deny how good enemies and bosses looked. Just look at this beautiful bastard right here. Number 2 would be the GBA for the same reasons, mostly Solar Rebirth, and it's pretty easy. Number 3 would be Pixel Remaster for the ease of access that it offers, since it's on almost everything. Yeah, it's just kind of the NES version, but they still kept that post-GBA balancing and did even more balancing. But they cut Solar Rebirth. It's still an excellent game, and you can use boost to reduce grinding, but again, that's not really needed. Lastly, Origins would be my least recommended way to play it. I would say check that one out for historical curiosity, and that's it, because there are better versions around. Either way, if you've ever been skeptical about Final Fantasy II and its general reception, I hope this video at least made you want to try it out for yourself. To me, it's always been a game misunderstood, and sometimes intentionally. and that gets labeled as something of an odd duck, when in actuality, it set the precedent for what modern day Final Fantasy would become. Well guys, gals, and those in between, that's another one in the bin. After RPGs, we're getting back into horror. Yeah, next game is Silent Hill F. I think it's been enough time from my last video that I can do another Silent Hill game and not get burned out, because I do want to play it. And I got a new capture device, so hopefully 4K videos? Smart money would be to have a consistent theme on this channel for the algorithm, but no one knows how that works. While doing this video, my Parasite Eve 2 video randomly started gaining traction, so honestly, I have no idea what the algo wants. I'm just gonna do what I like and let it go from there. Anyway, 4K videos, hopefully next time. I say as if most people aren't watching this from a phone, but still, gotta upgrade when I can. But stay tuned, does Silent Hill rock, or is it disappointing? Check in soon for my thoughts. You can like, subscribe, comment, and hit the bell for any notifications for upcoming videos. Till then, stay blessed, and I'll catch you later.